Yorokobe, viewers! In this video, I'll be continuing my analysis of Garden of Avalon, the light novel detailing the backstory of Artoria Pendragon. This is part 2 of 3, so if you haven't seen the previous video, I highly recommend you check that out first. Welcome back to OtakuDaiKun. Dai here. As I already said, it's time to dive right back into Garden of Avalon. Previously, we covered chapters 0 and 1, which told us about Merlin being stuck in his tower in Avalon, reminiscing about the early stages of Artoria's life, both before and after drawing the sword and the stone. Chapter 2 is called The Light of the Planet. It begins at the aftermath of Vortigern's defeat. The ruined citadel is rebuilt into Camelot, the castle of chalk. I assume this is in reference to the chalk cliffs that surround Camelot. This title appears again in Fate Grand Order, with Mashu's noble phantasm, Lord Camelot, hazy walls of chalk. For as legendary as King Arthur is, her reign only lasts 10 years, from Camelot's construction to her death at the Battle of Camlon. The Saxon invaders still pose a threat, but not on the same scale. The Picts to the north are defeated, and Artoria helps maintain peace between the various lords. Here, Artoria is acquainting herself with Camelot just after it being built. She remarks her administrative office is too lavish, but Merlin insists that it's normal for a king to live big. She shouldn't be upset, because it's not like the castle was built by taxing citizens. Rather, it was made by fairies disguised as humans. The only actual humans working on the castle both know about the fairies and keep it a secret. At this point in history, the fairies have mostly fled to the reverse side, but they're still able to come and go through an opening between them. Demonic beasts and giants still roam the land, but only because they lack the means to reach the reverse side. The dragon Albion has long since died, with its soul reaching the reverse side, but its body left behind deep in the earth. Ultimately, Artoria needs to focus on fending off the Saxons. She has Sir Tristan and Bedivere holding down the southern border. Merlin acts like Tristan's romantic gestures toward women are a problem, but Artoria confides that she's only ever worried about him and Sir Kay. Among her knights, Artoria relies on Sir Agravain to properly assess the others. He's like the ultimate secretary. As one of Morgan Le Fay's many children, Agravain is supposed to sabotage Arthur's reign, but instead remains loyal, recognizing the king's potential. He's cold and calculating, but his judgments are on point. He rarely fights on the front lines, but when he does, he always returns unscathed, giving him the nickname Agravain the Woundless. While the Round Table is literally a circular table, it was originally a mystic code forged to represent bonds between those who sit among its 13 seats. At this moment, they have yet to all assemble, but the 13 knights happen to be Artoria, Percival, Kay, Gareth, Gaheris, Palamedes, Galahad, and Agravain. As far as I'm aware, all of these knights have appeared in at least one work in the Nasuverse, except for Gaheris and Palamedes. They are the only two who have no official artwork. Sir Tristan, son of King Rivelin, is known as the Child of Sorrow. He's so charming that even fairies get bashful in his presence. While he's a master bowman, nobody really considers his weapon a bow at all. Rather, his noble phantasm Failnaught is a harp, and its strings fire sonic waves in lieu of actual arrows. Before, Artoria's people could blame Vortigern and the Saxons for their misfortune. Without such iconic foes, however, the people are left without anyone else to blame for Britain's infertile land. Expecting King Arthur to be their savior, the people shift that blame onto her, and she accepts it stoically. Merlin remarks that the problem isn't Britain's poor harvest, but rather because the people can no longer see Rungominiad's light. Unlike Excalibur, which was forged by the planet to protect itself, Rungominiad is meant to keep reality anchored to the planet. I've got an entire lesson in Magecraft dedicated to textures if you want to know more. In either case, Artoria is using two incredible divine constructs that weren't originally made for her use. That's why Excalibur's power is mostly sealed away, and the lance that she uses is just a projection of the actual thing. Either way, while Artoria possesses the lance, Britain's people cannot see its light. This makes Artoria want to return it immediately, but Vivian, the Lady of the Lake, entrusted Excalibur, its scabbard Avalon, and Rungominiad to Artoria for a reason. The small island of Britain happens to be one of the last bastions of Arcana. It is the final place where beings from the Age of Gods can remain, specifically because it is cut off from the rest of society. This also makes it the one place where some evil mage could flip the world on its head, disrupting reality as we know it. Thus, by protecting Britain, Artoria is helping protect the entire planet. Had Vortigern won out, for instance, Earth would have been in grave peril. Speaking of Vortigern, as he turned to ash, he told Artoria that Britain will perish, but before it ends, she herself will fall. Luckily, only she and Gawain had heard this ominous prophecy. Artoria's PR is already bad enough without that. Her citizens and fellow knights fought to achieve a more prosperous future, but conflict still endures, just in a different form. As a symbol of hope, the people place all their expectations on Artoria, so the more struggling and suffering she endures, the more prosperous Britain will be. She's like the Dark Knight, a martyr who bears the people's burden in their place. When Artoria confidently accepts this tragic role, Merlin realizes he's gone too far in raising her this way. He knows that she'll face regrets, but he reasons it's too late to stop her. This part is a total contradiction, but I think it's supposed to be that way. Artoria has a connection with lions. In her youth, she raised a lion cub for a time, and so it's easy to associate Artoria with being prideful. She is indeed proud to be king, but not for the sake of fame or glory. Many kings, like Iskandar and Gilgamesh, are quite selfish. They put themselves on a pedestal, living lavishly for their own ambitions, and the people use their kings as role models to emulate. Artoria certainly has this charisma, but she isn't ruling for her own ambitions. As a martyr to her people, unless she brings those people absolute prosperity, she will never be happy. Yet, even Merlin knows Britain will not last as is, and that Artoria is attempting the impossible. I assume he was hoping for a more selfish king. Thus, for as noble and brave as Artoria looks, standing at the forefront of battle, there's a profound tragedy to it as well. She takes pride in her sacrifice rather than her own ego. This chapter also has its own Tales of the Knights section, and it comes from Gawain. He states that even though the Knights of the Round Table are supposed to be seen as equal in merit, all of them saw Artoria as superior, and without her, their unity would break apart. He recounts the only time he ever doubted Artoria's assured victory, that being when they fought Vortigern. Accompanied by a troop of elite soldiers, Gawain and Artoria fought their way through the citadel and into the throne room. There, Vortigern stood alone, proclaiming that Britain should be plunged into hell and transformed into a paradise free from human taint. As an armored menace shrouded in shadow, he swallowed the radiance of Gawain's sword, Excalibur Galatine. Artoria praised Gawain, saying that because his light was so powerful, Vortigern could not stomach all of Excalibur's light. With but a faint glimmer remaining on her blade, Artoria went to confront Vortigern on her own. She held out for several hours, until Vortigern destroyed the entire fortress by inhaling dark clouds and growing into the form of a colossal dragon. With their forces decimated, only Artoria and Gawain remained. While Gawain sought to retreat, his king beckoned him for aid. Together they resumed the battle, pinning Vortigern to the ground by stabbing their respective holy swords into his hands. Unable to fly away, the vile dragon was left vulnerable as Artoria drew out Rongominiad and used it to pierce his heart. Defeated, Vortigern began to disintegrate in the rain, returning to his humanoid shape. Inching forward, step by step, he explained that Artoria, with the red dragon's essence, is incompatible with Britain as it gives way to the Age of Man. Like a proper villain, Vortigern ripped the spear from his chest, laughing to his final breath. Naturally, Gawain watched all of this, simping for his king all the way, and I don't blame him. Chapter 3, The Wandering Son, starts after Vortigern's death and filling the Round Table. So that Britain could have both a king and queen, Artoria took Guinevere's hand in marriage. It was a marriage in form only, done for political stability. Artoria told Guinevere the truth of her gender, and the two of them agreed to keep it a secret. For Guinevere herself, it came as quite a shock. For the decades since Artoria pulled Caliburn, Guinevere had been yearning for the king's affection. With great respect and adoration, she was delighted to be chosen as Arthur's queen, only to have that dream shattered with a single revelation. After pursuing Arthur as a man, Guinevere did not feel the same for Artoria the woman, and yet she understood the importance of this marriage and agreed to it anyway. Thus, while the two look like a blessed couple, their happiness was anything but, and Artoria lamented Guinevere's sacrifice. That said, Guinevere also thinks Artoria is making a big sacrifice. Through this arrangement, neither of them would receive what she describes as a woman's happiness. Honestly, I think Reen and her tongue would have to disagree, but Artoria was a product of her time after all. Thankfully, while there was no romance between the king and queen, they did share a genuine camaraderie. Lancelot joined the Round Table at around the same time as the marriage. Agravain was reluctant, but Lancelot was welcomed for being the feudal lord of a foreign land in France. He brought with him continental trade. The Knights of the Round Table achieved their most famous feats during this period, traveling the land and aiding Britain's people. They all saw each other as rivals, testing their valor and might against each other. Merlin would often join in these adventures, causing mayhem by flirting with various women. While Britain was still in decay, their capital stood out as the Camelot of Flowers, a place filled with smiles and hope. There, it was only Artoria who stood alone, staring reality in the face. Not even Camelot can remain prosperous forever. This is when Merlin informs Artoria about the Age of Gods and its decline. Whatever fertility Britain's lands had depended on the flourishing mana the Age of Gods provided. In other words, it wasn't just foreign invaders that were ruining the land. The land itself was in decline from the very start. If anything, fighting against foreign tribes may have actually hastened this decline. Of course, Arthur wasn't about to let her kingdom be taken over, but she now had to consider whether to embrace or reject foreign influence altogether. Building a mutually amicable relationship with others isn't easy, however, especially not when they come bearing arms. Even after Vortigern's defeat, even after Britain's rise in military power, a second wave of invasions began. For as little as Britain had, there were those with nothing at all who sought even a fraction of that prosperity. Even worse, they didn't come just to steal crops, but also claim the land itself as their own. Adding to the fire, many of these invaders are provoked by Rome, which after decades of absence, have suddenly taken an interest in Britain once again. Thus, King Arthur took to the battlefield once more to repel these invaders. Unlike with Vortigern, which united the people's hate under a single source of evil, these new battles were against raw human nature. People without leadership, struggling to survive even another year, proved to be more tumultuous. On a daily basis, Artoria held councils of war, making camp outside the comfort of her castle. This meant going to various villages, depriving her own people of their homes and resources for the war effort. It brought shame to her and her knights, even though the evicted were given a place to migrate to safely. It was for the greater good, but without that broader perspective, her valiance as a king who always fought on the front lines became the symbol of an inhuman warlord who would abandon her people just to quell barbarians. This led to some lords mounting an insurrection, giving Artoria yet another foe to contend with. Despite all of this, she prevailed, leading her forces to victory at every turn. Sadly, her people demanded so much more from her, hoisting upon her lofty expectations that no human could ever endure. This led to Sir Tristan declaring that King Arthur does not understand the human heart. With these scornful words, Tristan parted from the Round Table, and nobody questioned him for doing so, as they all understood the painful contradiction they were trapped in. Artoria was making the objectively ideal choice, harming the few in order to save the many. Yet her ability to actually follow through on this plan made her seem inhuman. She was just too good at it. Following in Tristan's wake, many other esteemed knights retired from her army. Rather than condemning them as traitors, she granted them the ability to govern their own lands. Even this was a strategic move, as it allowed her to use those territories as decoys in her next campaign. Seeing this, her remaining knights only became more reluctant to confide in her as a fellow human. Accepting their hatred, Artoria continued through what became 12 grueling battles against the foreign tribes. After driving her enemy into a corner, she prevailed in one final offensive at Mons Badonicus. Having slain 40% of her enemy's forces, the invaders swore an oath never to set foot in Britain again. Standing atop a small hill, Artoria looked upon her knights with Excalibur thrust into the ground. Despite achieving this victory, she showed no personal joy, instead sharing the glory with her knights. In the long run, her effort to defeat the invaders only set back her larger concern of Britain's depleting mana. In order to resolve that, she confided in Merlin, learning of a miracle on par with Britain's former arcana, that is, the Holy Grail. If Artoria could obtain the Holy Grail spoken of in legend, she could restore prosperity to her dying lands. Thus, the Knights of the Round Table embark on separate journeys to find the Grail, nearly all of them returning in failure. Percival even dies in the process of coveting the Grail. Lancelot's son, Galahad, was the only one to actually find it, but he was such a virtuous guy that he sent the Grail back to heaven, ascending to heaven alongside it. As a result, Camelot never prospered from the Grail, and the 10th year of Artoria's reign marks her demise. The scene suddenly changes, with Merlin asking Artoria about the meaning of chivalry. She says it means upholding morals and being a shield for the people, someone who never shows fear in battle and doesn't take up the sword for their own sake. Merlin states that chivalry can be different for every person, like a personal creed. He mentions Lancelot must have had his own chivalry toward Guinevere. It seems Merlin is trying to cheer Artoria up in the wake of Lancelot's affair, but Artoria laughs it off, proclaiming not to feel bitter in the least. Rather, Artoria feels sorry for them, as their political situation meant Lancelot and Guinevere had to hold back their feelings for each other. If anything, she's sad the Round Table has shrunk. In Lancelot's flight, he slaughtered Agravain, Gareth, and Gaheris. Gawain was wounded and is since resentful. Before she can even deal with Lancelot, though, Artoria turns her focus to Rome, which has become an encroaching threat on par with the Saxons. Merlin looks at her confidence and radiance with sorrow. He keeps telling her that nothing lasts forever, yet he knows she won't ever back down from her oath as a king. He tries to teach her that her rule is more important than its outcome. Even if she fails, she should take pride in what she's achieved. He's obviously trying to ease the pain he knows she'll encounter in the future. Merlin is already aware of her demise, and realizes that she won't find peace until Britain truly prospers. Sadly, she doesn't understand, because she has no pride towards herself and her own happiness. Whatever dreams she could cling to were suppressed long ago. On to the chapter's Tale of the Knights, we hear from Lancelot's perspective. This is after Agravain discovered his affair with Guinevere and imprisoned her. In a fit of rage, Lancelot came to Guinevere's rescue, killing valuable knights in order to bring her back to his home country. With Guinevere sleeping beside him, he reflects on his actions. He imagines Guinevere must be begging Arthur for forgiveness even in her dreams. In a shallow gesture of solidarity, Lancelot remains in his armor until Artoria returns from Rome. Thinking of the past, he recalls that Uther Pendragon also had magical powers, but feared his next of kin would not. That's why Uther sought to father a child with the Red Dragon's essence. This plan backfired when Artoria wound up being a girl, and his legitimate daughter Morgan also inherited his supernatural blood. By all means, Artoria's birth wasn't even necessary, and yet it was her they placed their hopes on instead of Morgan. Resenting that decision, Morgan has always secretly tried to sabotage her sister's reign. Unlike Morgan, Artoria was raised and presented to the world as a man. Even though she seems really feminine to us, she always wore her armor, and nobody questioned her appearance since it was already unnatural, never aging past the day she drew Caliburn. Lancelot then recounts his first experience with Arthur. From across the sea, he had heard of the Sword of Selection, and arrogantly thought that nobody but himself could be such a valiant knight. As such, he ignored the rumors, boasting of his own achievements. He set sail to Britain to prove his superiority, only to spot Artoria in battle from afar. As someone who valued strength and weight, he scoffed at what he saw as a young boy riding about the battlefield. After a deeper look, however, he began to realize the essence of a knight comes not from the body, but the spirit. Impressed by Artoria's resolve, Lancelot joined her in the fight, and was invited to Camelot to speak with her. He prioritized becoming a knight of the Round Table, never knowing about Artoria's actual gender. Rather, he and the other knights admired her as a handsome king. As long as she did her job, none of her subjects cared to pry into her personal affairs. While many of the knights eventually began to see Artoria as inhuman, Lancelot disagreed with that foolish notion. Perhaps this is because he is an outsider, a knight from France with different values. While Britain values their nation, Lancelot values individual people. His chivalry would have him be with the woman he loves, even if it meant forsaking his nation. Still, when Tristan called her inhuman, and the other knights began to doubt her, Lancelot yearned to prevent Artoria's suffering. Guinevere wanted the same, which is how she and Lancelot grew closer to each other. Because they both shared a concern for Artoria, Guinevere decided to tell him the truth about their king. This also meant learning of Guinevere's loneliness, making Lancelot resent Britain itself for pushing this burden upon her. This anger helped him betray Artoria in favor of sleeping with the queen. Perhaps this would have worked out if they kept it a secret, but Agravain discovered and exposed the affair. When Agravain became Artoria's secretary, he too learned of her secret, and this likely urged him to keep an eye on Guinevere. He doubted the queen's loyalty, and it was this skepticism that helped him expose the affair. Lancelot could not stand by as Agravain insulted the queen and her worthiness, causing him to lash out in a fit of rage. By forsaking his idealism, Lancelot felt a sense of relief in being branded a traitor. He thought it would show Artoria the limits of humanity, and hopefully have her evaluate her own idealism. In other words, he wanted to be punished, yet Artoria did no such thing. Instead, Artoria sent him a letter, forgiving both him and Guinevere, trusting they had a just reason for their betrayal. This broke Lancelot's poor little brain. At first, he hoped Artoria was only forgiving him for the sake of the country, as a means of bringing him back as an ally. Why else would she allow the friendship she treasured with Guinevere be so easily stomped on? But no, Lancelot could tell this forgiveness was genuine. Artoria truly wished for their happiness at the expense of her own. Yet again, this glorious king showed a smile for others, appreciating happiness while never knowing it for herself. As such, Lancelot begins to fear Artoria as a monster, one much worse than Vortigern. No matter how much he respects and reveres her, he refuses to acknowledge her as a human anymore. His fear of someone so fundamentally selfless will transform into hatred, which is exactly what we see in Fate Zero. Well, with another 2 chapters down, I think it's time to wrap up this video. Please look forward to part 3, where I'll finally cover this novel's dramatic ending. Thanks for watching!
If you enjoy this channel, help us grow by liking, commenting, sharing the video, subscribing to OtakuDaiKun, and
most of all, smashing that notification bell so you don't miss out on all of our anime discussion, lore, or Let's Play content.
You can support us directly through Patreon, Subscribestar, or our YouTube membership, all of which come with benefits like exclusive vids and early access.
As always,
celebrate your fandom!
I want to give a special shout out to all my $10 and up supporters: VideoGamer75, Stephen Elak, Samuel Gersten, Otaku Mom, Jens Bauman, Mystic Samurai 1983, Lord Omagoden, Freebrick, RNGer Shuffles 1498, Alexis Yukio Gomez Yamato, Johnny Tsunami, Link Pendrago, Brandon Baker, Observer Bellis, Flash Daniel, Caitlin P, Vladimirovna, Normace, Jonathan Padua, The Taz 96, and SF Giants fan Mike. Thank you all so much.